This week, with unrest comes conspiracy theories, misinformation, and disinformation, and the recent protests over the killing of George Floyd are no exception. And interestingly, or exhaustingly enough, a lot of the false information being spread has to do with a guy named George Soros. So let's talk about it. I'm Lev Gringauz, and welcome to The Jews Are Tired, your podcast about Jewish news. So just to put things in context of why it's important to understand the false information being spread about the recent protests, when people think something is happening, they will react to it, whether or not it's actually real. Now, that may seem like a stupidly obvious thing to say, but I still think a lot of us underestimate the effect of that false information. As an example, based on an NBC News story that's in the podcast notes, in some smaller towns across the country where people have been gathering to legitimately protest police brutality, there have been rumors spread that busloads of Antifa members are being sent in to burn down the town. Never mind that Antifa is, at best, a loose coalition of people with anti-fascist ideology and not an organized group, and never mind the fact that there are not busloads of people traveling to these towns to burn them down. But the rumors put gun-wielding citizens and police forces on high alert, and they then went to the legitimate protests all decked out in gear looking for a fight with this roving band of buses. So a peaceful protest is a peaceful protest, but then a bunch of scared gun-wielding people show up, and that's a situation likely to turn bad, to put it mildly. Though so far, these rumors haven't caused any outbreak of violence. But still, it's dangerous. These rumors are dangerous, and it makes people question even legitimate peaceful protesting. Now, the part I've left out, and the bit I now want to get to, is that the bigger conspiracy theory of who is behind these fake bands of buses is that George Soros is paying for them and paying for protesters across the country. And there are even some horrible conspiracy theories that say George Soros paid to have George Floyd killed by Minneapolis police to spark off all of this unrest. So now let's talk Soros. George Soros was born in Hungary in 1930 to a Jewish family with the last name Schwartz, which was later changed to Soros as anti-Semitism increased so the family could blend in for more security. And like most, if not all, European Jews, Soros was trapped by the rise of Nazi Germany. World War II started when he was 9 and ended when he was 15. Now, for those of you who might not know that much about the Holocaust in Hungary, there's a bit of a different history than you might be used to hearing. For most of World War II, Jews in Hungary were not deported to concentration or extermination camps and were, relatively speaking, safe from what was happening to Jews across the continent. That changed in 1944 when Hitler decided that he'd had enough of Hungary not doing as it was told, and Nazi Germany invaded. As a result, in the last year of the war, hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were deported and killed. But George Soros and his family got fake papers that said they were actually Christians, and Soros also posed for a time as the godson of an official in the fascist Hungarian government. And that's how he survived. So after the war, Soros heads to England to attend the London School of Economics, then ends up in the United States, starts a hedge fund, gets mega rich, and starts to use his billions of dollars for philanthropy. He's got a philanthropic organization called the Open Society Foundations that operates in over 120 countries, and they've done stuff like pay for young political dissidents in communist Eastern Europe to go to school in the West, and just generally put money into programs focused on opportunity, social justice, and democracy. So you start to see where some of the conspiracy theories can develop. You've got this rich Jew, the capitalist banker stereotype, who is philanthropically engaged in over 120 countries and is influencing them according to his agenda. To make this clearer, it's almost too easy to be anti-Semitic about this guy and feed into the narrative of the rich Jews who control the world. But that's still sort of a fringe thing until the early 2000s, when Soros starts to get heavily involved in American politics and becomes a huge Democratic donor and very outspoken against the Iraq War and the War on Terror. So now, right-wing Americans see this rich Jewish dude spending tons of money to influence America in a way they don't like. So it's, again, too easy to just blame everything on this guy. And that has reached some epic proportions since Trump was elected in 2016. George Soros has been accused of, most recently, creating the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. When a Trump-loving Florida man in 2018 sent pipe bombs to people like George Soros, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama, right-wing pundits said that actually it was all just a hoax, thought up and paid for by Soros himself to discredit Trump. There are also conspiracy theories that Soros paid for neo-Nazis to march in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017 in the infamous Unite the Right rally, again, just to discredit Trump. And again, this false information has real-world effects. The white supremacist who murdered 11 Jews in the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in 2018 believed that George Soros was paying for immigrants to come and destabilize the United States. And Black Lives Matter, all the legitimate, peaceful protests, all actors paid for by George Soros, according to conspiracy theories. The Anti-Defamation League, a Jewish organization that tracks hate crimes and false information, said that, quote, aggressive language towards Soros has exploded on social media sites like Twitter, where a sample assessment showed that negative tweets about Soros rose from 20,000 per day on May 26th to more than 500,000 per day on May 30th, end quote. Not that Twitter is a great way to understand what real people in the real world are thinking, but there's enough of this stuff that many people legitimately believe that all of these protests are completely fake because Soros paid for them. And to be clear, no, Soros has not paid for protesters. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty, he has, through his philanthropic foundation, given money to organizations involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, but he does not pay people to protest or pay organizations specifically to get people to protest. The recent protests, in case you were wondering, are legitimate protests about police brutality. But to get back to Soros for another moment, he's kind of fun in the sense that a lot of people will blame him for stuff happening in the world, but then say it's not anti-Semitic because, well, it's not about him being Jewish. It's because he's a rich guy, using his liberal influence on the world. Well, here's what the ADL had to say about that. Quote, a person who promotes a Soros conspiracy theory may not intend to promulgate anti-Semitism, but Soros's Jewish identity is so well known that in many cases it is hard not to infer that meaning. This is especially true when Soros-related conspiracy theories include other well-worn anti-Semitic tropes, such as control of the media or banks, references to undermining societies or destabilizing countries, or language that harkens back to the medieval blood libels and the characterization of Jews as evil, demonic, or agents of the Antichrist. Even if no anti-Semitic insinuation is intended, casting a Jewish individual as a puppet master who manipulates national events for malign purposes has the effect of mainstreaming anti-Semitic tropes and giving support, however unwitting, to bona fide anti-Semites and extremists who disseminate these ideas knowingly and with malice. End quote. And now we get to somewhat of the real kicker, at least in the Jewish world, which is that given all of this, there are some Jews who blame Soros for just about anything. And it's contributed to a controversy at the top of Jewish institutional leadership in this country. To give you the background, there's this organization called the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Great name, I know. But the Conference of Presidents is basically a massive umbrella advocacy group for all the major Jewish organizational players in the United States from across the denominational and political spectrum. It's been active since the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s and is pretty much the last place now for Jewish groups who otherwise would never sit at the same table to get together and talk. Now, one of the prominent organizations in the conference is the Zionist Organization of America, which over the past 20 years has taken a big pivot to the right, politically speaking, ever since a guy named Mort Klein became the ZOA president. And Klein has a way of being outspoken, shall we say. He has called Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, two Muslim congresswomen who are outspoken critics of Israel in ways some people see as being anti-Semitic, quote, worse than white supremacists, end quote. Klein has accused liberal Jewish organizations like the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, now just called HIAS, of supporting terrorists. And most recently, Klein tweeted that the Black Lives Matter movement should be called a hate group because they are a, quote, Jew-hating, white-hating, Israel-hating, conservative, black-hating, violence-promoting, dangerous Soros-funded extremist group of haters, end quote. And look, there's a somewhat more legitimate conversation that some Jews are having about the fact that a few years ago, the Movement for Black Lives, a prominent Black Lives Matter coalition, adopted a platform that was widely seen as anti-Israel, which admittedly made a lot of Jews very uncomfortable. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it's a stretch to call the whole Black Lives Matter movement Jew-hating, violence-promoting, Soros-funded group of haters. And I'm not the only one who, let's say, raises an eyebrow at this. So now, liberal and left-wing Jews are calling for Klein and the Zionist Organization of America to be thrown out of the Conference of Presidents over these remarks, widely seen to be racist and on par for Klein's history of making racist and inflammatory statements. And again, it's just kind of interesting. I mean, I can't hide my personal, it's an almost sick curiosity with the fact that Klein went all in for this rant about Black Lives Matter, and he just had to include the bit about the movement being Soros-funded. It's an insidious conspiracy theory. And here's where I want to close and tie all of these threads together. Pointing to George Soros isn't just a matter of, okay, conspiracy theories. It's a matter of delegitimizing reality and a matter of not engaging with real concerns and real social movements, be it movements like Black Lives Matter, focused on ending police brutality in this country, or movements like the Unite the Right rally in 2017, where real neo-Nazis got together because they felt now was a good time for them to reemerge. And to be clear, I am not comparing BLM to neo-Nazis, God forbid. What I am saying is that George Soros is the ultimate excuse for a lot of people to just not engage with any of the real issues plaguing this country. And I don't know that those people's minds can be changed, but I do know that the more the rest of us know about these conspiracy theories, the more responsible we can be in navigating a volatile information environment, particularly online. On the plus side, I guess if there is a plus side, this stuff also gives the Jews something to add to our history of dark humor. To leave you on a funny-ish note, as one Twitter user complained, quote, between sending the Soros squad to Black Lives Matter protests, training US cops to kill black people, and creating COVID-19, we Jews barely have the time to control the weather anymore. This has been this week's The Jews Are Tired podcast. I'm Lev Gringauz. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and hopefully next week the Jews will get some rest. The Jews Are Tired is a product of Jewfolk Inc. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com or email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com.